In the autumn of 2010, the small coastal town of Port Haven, Maine, nestled between rugged cliffs and the restless Atlantic, carried the quiet charm of a place untouched by the rush of city life. The Harper family lived in a modest two-story home on Maple Street, its white clapboard exterior weathered by salty air and framed by towering pine trees that swayed in the October wind. The house, with its creaking porch and flower boxes filled with fading marigolds, stood as a testament to the family's rootedness in the community. Emily Harper, a 38-year-old mother of three, was the heart of the household, known for her warm smile that could brighten the gloomiest of New England days and her tireless dedication to her family's well-being. Her days were filled with small acts of care, packing lunches, mending clothes, and organizing community bake sales at the local church. On a crisp morning, with the sky a pale blue and leaves crunching underfoot, Emily prepared to head out for her routine grocery run to prepare for a family dinner. The night before, she had sat at the kitchen table, her auburn hair tied loosely in a ponytail, jotting down a list of ingredients for her signature pot roast, a dish the family cherished for its comforting familiarity. She wore her favorite navy sweater, its sleeves slightly frayed from years of use, and a pair of jeans that spoke to her practical nature. Her silver minivan, parked in the driveway, gleamed faintly in the morning light, its interior cluttered with soccer gear and school books belonging to her children. Before leaving, she kissed her husband, Michael, on the forehead as he sat in the living room, his posture stiff from the chronic back pain that had plagued him since a car accident 6 months prior. A high school history teacher, Michael, at 40, was still adjusting to the physical limitations that forced him to take a leave of absence from teaching, his days now spent navigating a haze of painkillers and physical therapy appointments. Their 3 children were scattered throughout the house that morning. Caleb, 17, was in his room, headphones on, engrossed in a book about automotive engineering, his dream of becoming a mechanic already taking shape despite his father's hopes for a college-bound future. Lily, 14, lounged on the couch, sketching in her notebook, her artistic flair evident in the intricate drawings of the Maine coastline that adorned her bedroom walls. Noah, 9, played in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball against the fence with boundless energy, unaware of the weight of adult concerns. Emily called out her usual farewell, promising to be back by noon, her voice carrying the reassuring cadence that had anchored the family through countless days. The front door closed behind her, and the minivan's engine hummed as it pulled out of the driveway, disappearing down the tree-lined street. As noon approached, the house remained quiet, the scent of brewing coffee lingering in the kitchen where Michael sat, grading papers to keep his mind occupied. He glanced at the clock, expecting to hear the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. When 1 o'clock passed without Emily's return, a flicker of unease stirred in his chest. He dialed her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail, her cheerful greeting only deepening his concern. He tried again, then a third time, each unanswered call tightening the knot in his stomach. Caleb emerged from his room, noticing his father's furrowed brow, and asked if everything was okay. Michael brushed it off, assuming Emily had been delayed at the store or perhaps stopped to chat with a neighbor, a common occurrence in tight-knit Port Haven. But by 2 o'clock, with no word from her, the unease grew into alarm. Lily, sensing the shift in her father's demeanor, joined them in the kitchen, her sketchbook forgotten. Noah, called in from the backyard, clung to the hope that his mother was simply running late. Michael drove to the local grocery store, his back protesting with every turn of the wheel, searching for the silver minivan in the parking lot. The lot was half empty, and Emily's vehicle was nowhere to be seen. Inside, the cashier, a familiar face from church, confirmed that Emily hadn't been there that morning. Michael's heart raced as he checked other nearby stores, a pharmacy, a bakery, places Emily might have visited, but no one had seen her. Returning home, he called the Port Haven police, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. 2 officers arrived within the hour, their notepads open as they asked routine questions about Emily's habits, her recent behavior, and any signs of distress. Michael explained that she had seemed her usual self, though he admitted the strain of his medical bills had weighed heavily on them both. The officers promised to look into it, checking traffic cameras and issuing a bulletin for the minivan, but their measured tone suggested they expected a simple explanation, a flat tire, a misunderstanding. As evening fell, the Harper home felt emptier than ever. The kitchen table, set for dinner, remained untouched, the pot roast ingredients still in their bags in Emily's mind, never purchased. Caleb took charge, heating up leftovers for Lily and Noah, his jaw set with a determination to keep things normal for his younger siblings. Lily sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the front door, as if willing her mother to walk through it. Noah, too young to fully grasp the situation, asked repeatedly when Mommy would be back. His questions met with strained reassurances. Michael paced the living room, his cane tapping against the hardwood floor, his mind racing through possibilities: car trouble, an accident, or something worse he dared not name. The town, usually a place of quiet routines, buzzed with whispers as news of Emily's disappearance spread. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and words of comfort, but their speculation, perhaps she'd run off, overwhelmed by family pressures, only deepened the family's distress. By nightfall, the police had found no trace of Emily or her minivan. A search of nearby roads turned up nothing, and her phone remained off, its last known location untraceable. The officers suggested she might have left voluntarily, a theory Michael rejected outright, knowing Emily's devotion to her family. Caleb, overhearing the conversation, felt a spark of resolve, vowing to himself that he would find her, no matter how long it took. Lily, retreating to her room, sketched her mother's face from memory, her pencil strokes heavy with unspoken fear. Noah fell asleep clutching Emily's scarf. Its faint lavender sent a fragile link to her presence. The pine trees outside swayed in the wind, their shadows stretching across the house as the Harpers faced the first of many nights without answers, their world irrevocably altered by a void that grew deeper with each passing hour. 10 years had passed since Emily Harper vanished from Port Haven, Maine, and the Harper family's life had reshaped itself around the gaping absence she left behind. By the autumn of 2020, the once lively home on Maple Street had grown quieter, its walls bearing the weight of unspoken grief. The pine trees outside still stood tall, but their branches seemed heavier, as if mirroring the family's burden. Michael Harper, now 50, had aged far beyond his years, his body and spirit worn down by chronic back pain and the relentless ache of loss. The car accident that had stolen his mobility in 2010 had also stolen his career as a high school history teacher, forcing him into early retirement. He spent his days in the living room, seated in a worn recliner, surrounded by books he no longer read and prescriptions that dulled his pain but not his regret. His cane, propped against the armrest, was a constant reminder of the physical and emotional toll of the past decade. The medical bills from his recovery had long been paid, but at a cost the family was only beginning to understand. Caleb, now 27, had traded his teenage dreams of college for the practical demands of supporting his family. After Emily's disappearance, he had taken a job at a local auto shop, his knack for fixing engines becoming his lifeline. By 2020, he had moved to Portland, working as a skilled mechanic at a busy garage, his hands perpetually stained with grease. His broad shoulders and steady gaze belied the restlessness that drove him to spend late nights searching for answers about his mother. He pored over old newspaper clippings, police reports, and online forums, chasing any hint of what might have happened to her. The town's speculation that Emily had fled under the pressure of financial strain or a strained marriage gnawed at him, but he refused to believe she would abandon them willingly. His siblings, however, had grown weary of his obsession, their own coping mechanisms pulling them in different directions. Lily, at 24, had carved out a life of her own, managing a cozy coffee shop in the heart of Port Haven. The shop, with its exposed brick walls and chalkboard menus, was a haven for locals, and Lily's efficiency kept it running smoothly. Her teenage passion for art had faded, replaced by a pragmatic focus on paying bills and maintaining stability. Her once vibrant spirit, which had filled sketchbooks with colorful depictions of the Maine coast, had dimmed under the weight of unanswered questions about her mother. She wore her dark hair in a practical bob, her hazel eyes carrying a guarded intensity. Lily had accepted the narrative that Emily had left voluntarily, a belief that allowed her to move forward but left a bitter edge to her memories. She avoided discussions about her mother, preferring to focus on the present, though late at night, when the shop was closed and the town was silent, she sometimes stared at old family photos, her fingers tracing Emily's smile. Noah, now 19, was a freshman at a community college in Bangor, studying computer science with a quiet determination. Having been only 9 when Emily disappeared, his memories of her were fragmented. Flashes of her laughter, the scent of her lavender perfume, the warmth of her hand ruffling his hair. Those fleeting images haunted him, shaping a longing for a mother he barely knew. He had grown into a lanky young man with his father's sharp jawline and a reserved nature, preferring the logic of code to the chaos of emotions. Noah rarely visited Port Haven, the distance helping him avoid the town's lingering whispers about his mother's fate. Yet, during late-night study sessions, he found himself searching online for missing persons cases, a habit he never admitted to his siblings, driven by a subconscious need to fill the void Emily had left. Caleb's persistence set him apart from his family, his belief in Emily's loyalty unshaken despite the years. On a chilly October evening in 2020, he returned to the family home to help Michael sort through clutter in the attic, a task meant to prepare the house for minor repairs. The attic was a cramped space, filled with dusty boxes, old furniture, and forgotten relics of their past. Among the stacks, Caleb uncovered a small wooden chest tucked behind a broken rocking chair. Its lock was rusted, but it opened with a gentle pry, revealing a collection of Emily's belongings: letters, a scarf, and a leather-bound journal. The journal's pages, yellowed but intact, chronicled Emily's thoughts in the months leading up to her disappearance. Her neat handwriting detailed the crushing weight of Michael's medical bills, the fear of losing their home, and her desperate attempts to keep the family afloat. One entry mentioned a meeting with R. Callahan, described as a local businessman who promised a loan with no questions asked. The name sparked something in Caleb, a faint memory of overheard gossip about a shady figure in Port Haven's underbelly. Driven by this discovery, Caleb began researching R. Callahan, spending hours at his apartment in Portland, his laptop glowing in the dim light. Public records yielded little, but online forums and old news articles hinted at Robert Callahan, a man tied to a network of storage facilities and rumored to dabble in less-than-legal ventures. The vagueness of the information frustrated Caleb, but the journal's mention of Callahan felt like a lifeline, a tangible clue after years of dead ends. He photographed the relevant pages, their ink faded but legible, and tucked the journal into his backpack, determined to dig deeper. At the garage, during lunch breaks, he searched property records, finding a storage facility on the outskirts of Port Haven linked to Callahan's name. The discovery fueled his resolve. But it also stirred unease. Callahan's reputation suggested connections to activities far darker than unpaid loans. Caleb kept the journal a secret from his family, knowing Lily's skepticism and Noah's detachment would dampen his momentum. Michael, lost in his own guilt, seemed too fragile to burden with unconfirmed leads. Caleb's nights grew longer as he cross-referenced names, addresses, and dates, building a mental map of Callahan's influence in Port Haven. He stumbled across a decade-old article about a police raid on one of Callahan's properties, which yielded no arrests but fueled rumors of smuggling and money laundering. The article mentioned a storage facility on Harbor Road, the same one noted in Emily's journal. Caleb's heart raced as he realized the connection, his fingers trembling as he jotted down the address. He considered visiting the site alone but hesitated, aware of the risks. Instead, he reached out to a local librarian, Mrs. Carter, who had known Emily and often helped Caleb with research. She provided access to archived town records, which revealed that Callahan had leased multiple properties under shell companies, one of which was active around the time of Emily's disappearance. The records hinted at a pattern. People linked to Callahan often vanished or relocated abruptly, their stories buried under layers of bureaucracy. As weeks passed, Caleb's fixation grew, straining his relationships. Lily noticed his distraction during their weekly phone calls, her tone sharp as she urged him to let go of the past. Noah, home for a weekend visit, avoided the topic entirely, his silence a wall Caleb couldn't breach. Michael, sensing Caleb's intensity, offered quiet support but seemed haunted by his own memories of Emily's stress in the months before she vanished. Caleb's apartment became a shrine to his investigation, its walls covered with printouts and sticky notes connecting Callahan to vague figures in Port Haven's underbelly. One entry in Emily's journal stood out, written just days before her disappearance. R.C. says it's the only way to save us. I don't trust him, but I have no choice. The words chilled Caleb, suggesting Emily had been drawn into something against her will. He resolved to visit the Harbor Road facility, determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the shadows of his mother's past alone. In the waning days of October 2020, Caleb Harper's pursuit of answers about his mother's disappearance led him to Sarah Mitchell, a private investigator based in Portland, Maine, known for her tenacity in unraveling cold cases. Sarah, a wiry woman in her late 40s with sharp gray eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, operated out of a cluttered office above a bookstore, its walls lined with case files and maps of New England. Caleb had found her through an online forum for missing persons, drawn to her reputation for tackling cases the police had long abandoned. He arrived at her office on a rainy afternoon, clutching Emily's journal, its leather cover worn from his constant handling. Sarah listened intently as Caleb recounted the decade-old mystery, her fingers tapping a pen against a notepad as she absorbed the details of Emily's final days and the cryptic reference to R. Callahan. The journal's entries, particularly the mention of a loan and a sense of desperation, piqued her curiosity, and she agreed to take on the case, sensing there was more to Emily's disappearance than a simple flight from financial strain. Sarah began by digging into Robert Callahan, the name that had surfaced in Emily's journal. Her initial searches through public databases revealed little, a handful of property records and a few mentions in local business directories. But her network of contacts, built over years of investigative work, proved more fruitful. A retired police officer, who had once investigated Callahan for suspected tax evasion, described him as a reclusive figure who owned a string of storage facilities across Maine, from Bangor to Kittery. The facilities, often registered under shell companies, were rumored to serve as fronts for illicit activities, though no charges had ever stuck. Sarah cross-referenced the journal's mention of a meeting with Callahan against property records from 2010, uncovering a lease for a storage facility on Harbor Road, just outside Port Haven, signed in Emily Harper's name. The lease, dated November 2010, a month after Emily vanished, raised more questions than answers. Why would a missing woman sign a lease, and what was Callahan's role in her life? Determined to see the site for themselves, Caleb and Sarah drove to Harbor Road one overcast morning, the coastal fog clinging to the landscape like a shroud. The facility was a desolate sprawl of low, corrugated metal buildings, their gates rusted and chained shut, the surrounding lot choked with weeds and littered with broken glass. A faded sign reading Harbor Storage Solutions hung crookedly above the entrance, its paint peeling under years of neglect. Sarah, experienced in navigating such places, brought tools to bypass the locked gate, and they slipped inside, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and rust. The main office, a small prefab structure, was secured with a padlock that Sarah deftly picked, revealing a dim interior cluttered with overturned furniture and scattered papers. Dust motes floated in the slivers of light filtering through cracked windows, and the floor creaked under their steps. Caleb's heart pounded as he scanned the room, half expecting to find some trace of his mother, though he knew it was unlikely after so long. Among the debris, Sarah found a metal filing cabinet, its drawers jammed but yielding to her persistence. Inside were faded documents, inventory lists, invoices, and lease agreements, many water-damaged but still legible. One invoice caught Caleb's eye, a receipt for storage unit rental, dated November 15, 2010, bearing Emily's signature in her distinctive looping script. The receipt listed miscellaneous goods stored at the facility, with a handwritten note referencing a transfer point at Port Haven's docks. The phrase sent a chill through Caleb, suggesting a connection to something larger, something organized and hidden. Sarah photographed the documents, her camera's flash illuminating the grimy office, and they sifted through more papers, finding references to shipments and coded terms that hinted at untraceable goods, possibly contraband or worse. The discovery fueled Caleb's hope that his mother had been caught in something beyond her control, but it also deepened his fear of what that might mean. Back at Sarah's office, they analyzed the findings, piecing together a timeline. The lease and receipt suggested Emily had been involved with the facility after her disappearance, contradicting the police's initial theory that she had left voluntarily. Sarah contacted a former colleague in the Port Haven Police Department, who confirmed that Callahan's facilities had been flagged in 2010 during an investigation into smuggling, though no evidence had been found to warrant a search. The colleague recalled rumors of Callahan offering high-interest loans to desperate locals, often with strings attached that pulled borrowers into his shadowy operations. Caleb's mind raced to Emily's journal, her words about having no choice echoing in his thoughts. He wondered if she had turned to Callahan out of desperation to cover Michael's medical bills, only to be ensnared in something she couldn't escape. Caleb returned home to share the findings with his family, though he dreaded their reactions. Michael, now a shadow of the vibrant teacher he had once been, sat in his recliner, his face etched with guilt as Caleb described the journal and the Harbor Road facility. He admitted, with a trembling voice, that he had known Emily was struggling to manage their finances after his accident. She had mentioned seeking help outside traditional banks, but he had been too consumed by his recovery to press for details, assuming she had found legitimate solutions. The revelation hit Caleb like a blow, confirming that his mother's disappearance might have been tied to her efforts to protect the family. He showed Michael the photographed receipt, and his father's eyes lingered on Emily's signature, a painful reminder of her presence. Lily, when Caleb called her at the coffee shop, listened with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She had long accepted that Emily had left to escape the family's burdens, a belief that allowed her to move forward but left her guarded. She questioned why Caleb was reopening old wounds, suggesting the lease could simply mean Emily had planned her departure, using the facility to store belongings before starting anew. Noah, reached by video call in Bangor, was even more detached, his memories of Emily too faint to fuel the same passion as Caleb's. He acknowledged the journal's significance but urged Caleb to be cautious, warning that chasing ghosts could unravel the fragile stability they had built. Despite their doubts, Caleb felt a spark of validation. The documents were proof that Emily's disappearance was not as simple as the town had assumed. Sarah, meanwhile, dug deeper into Callahan's network, using her contacts to track down former employees of his facilities. One, a retired truck driver, hinted at late-night deliveries to the Harbor Road site in 2010, describing unmarked vans and guarded exchanges that suggested more than just storage. The driver's reluctance to share more, coupled with his nervous glances, confirmed Sarah's suspicion that Callahan's operations extended beyond loans into something criminal. She and Caleb mapped out the connections, linking the Harbor Road facility to Port Haven's docks, where the transfer point mentioned in the receipt likely pointed. The docks, a bustling hub of fishing boats and cargo vessels, were a plausible hub for illicit activity, hidden in plain sight among the town's legitimate trade. Caleb's hope surged with each new piece of evidence, but so did his unease, as the shadow of Callahan's world loomed larger, threatening to reveal truths about his mother's fate that he might not be ready to face. In November 2020, Caleb Harper's resolve to uncover the truth about his mother's disappearance propelled him toward Port Haven's docks, a sprawling network of piers and warehouses where the salty tang of the Atlantic mingled with the hum of industry. The docks, a vital artery of the town's economy, bustled with fishing boats unloading their catch and cargo ships maneuvering under the gray Maine sky. Caleb, driven by the receipt found at the Harbor Road storage facility, believed the transfer point mentioned in the document pointed to this hub of activity. Sarah Mitchell, the private investigator who had become his ally, shared his determination but urged caution, warning that the docks were a likely nexus for Robert Callahan's shadowy operations. Her contacts in law enforcement had revealed that Callahan's network was under intermittent scrutiny for suspected human trafficking and money laundering, though concrete evidence remained elusive, leaving his enterprises largely untouched. Despite her warnings, Caleb's impatience grew, fueled by the faint hope that his mother, Emily, might still be alive, entangled in Callahan's world. Sarah's research pinpointed a vessel, the Northern Star, a weathered cargo ship registered to a shell company linked to Callahan. The ship was scheduled to depart Port Haven in 3 days, its manifest vague, listing only miscellaneous cargo bound for an unspecified port in Canada. Sarah's law enforcement contacts confirmed that similar vessels had been flagged in the past for carrying undocumented goods, but searches had yielded nothing definitive. The Northern Star's impending departure felt like a ticking clock to Caleb, each passing hour narrowing the window to find answers. Sarah, methodical in her approach, spent hours cross-referencing shipping records and employee rosters, uncovering a pattern of late-night activity at the docks involving unmarked vans and guarded loading zones. She shared her findings with Caleb at her Portland office, the walls now plastered with maps of the docks and timelines of Callahan's known activities. Yet, Caleb's restlessness pushed him beyond her careful planning, his need for immediate action overriding her advice to wait for more evidence. On a moonless night, Caleb drove alone to the docks, the harbor's lights casting long reflections across the dark water. He parked his truck a block away, blending into the shadows of a warehouse district where rusted cranes loomed like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and seaweed, and the distant clank of metal echoed as workers prepared ships for departure. Caleb, dressed in a dark jacket and cap to avoid attention, slipped past a chain-link fence, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. He navigated the maze of crates and containers, his eyes scanning for any sign of the Northern Star. Near a secluded pier, he spotted a smaller boat moored alongside a larger vessel, its deck illuminated by dim sodium lights. A group of workers moved crates from a van to the boat, their movements hurried but precise. Among them was a woman, her figure slight and her hair streaked with gray, her posture eerily familiar. Caleb's breath caught as he squinted through the darkness, convinced it was Emily. Her movements, though slower and more guarded, mirrored the way his mother used to carry herself when organizing family tasks. Before he could move closer, a security guard emerged from the shadows, his flashlight beam cutting through the night. The guard, a burly man with a weathered face, barked a warning for Caleb to leave, his hand resting on a walkie-talkie. Caleb retreated, his pulse racing. The image of the woman burned into his mind. Back at his apartment, Caleb called Sarah, his voice trembling as he described the sighting. Sarah, alarmed by his recklessness, insisted he stay away from the docks, warning that Callahan's men were likely dangerous and alert to intruders. She contacted Detective Laura Evans, a seasoned officer with the Port Haven police who had worked with Sarah on past cases. Laura, intrigued by the lead, agreed to investigate, pulling records on the Northern Star and coordinating with the Coast Guard to monitor its movements. She confirmed that Callahan's name had surfaced in prior investigations, though his influence in the town, rumored to include payoffs to local officials, had kept him untouchable. Sarah shared the receipt and Emily's journal with Laura, who saw the connection to the docks as a potential breakthrough. The women planned a sting operation, aiming to intercept the Northern Star before it left port, suspecting it was a linchpin in Callahan's illicit activities. Caleb, unable to stay idle, drove to his father's house on Maple Street to share the development with his family. The Harper home, once a place of warmth, now felt like a museum of their loss, its walls lined with faded family photos. Michael, frail and hunched over his cane, listened as Caleb explained the dock's sighting and the Northern Star's connection to Callahan. Guilt etched deeper lines into Michael's face as he recalled Emily's quiet desperation in 2010, her late-night phone calls and vague assurances that she had found a way to manage their debts. He admitted he had never questioned her methods, too consumed by his pain and recovery to notice her growing anxiety. The revelation stirred a mix of hope and shame in Michael, who insisted on being involved despite his weakened state, determined to make amends for his past inaction. Lily, summoned from her coffee shop, arrived with a skeptical frown, her arms crossed as Caleb recounted his reckless trip to the docks. She had long buried her hope, convinced Emily had chosen to leave to escape the family's burdens. The idea that her mother might have been coerced felt too painful to embrace, threatening the fragile acceptance she had built. Noah, joining via video call from Bangor, listened with a furrowed brow, his memories of Emily too faint to fuel the same urgency as Caleb's. Yet, the possibility of their mother's survival stirred something in him, a flicker of curiosity about the woman he barely knew. Despite their doubts, both siblings agreed to support Caleb, moved by his conviction and Michael's quiet resolve. They gathered in the living room, the same space where they had waited for Emily a decade earlier, now united by a shared, if hesitant, hope. Laura Evans, meanwhile, finalized plans for the sting operation, coordinating with a small team of officers and the Coast Guard. She stationed undercover agents at the docks, their radios crackling with updates as they monitored the Northern Star's crew. The ship, docked at a far pier, was under tight security, its loading activities shielded by tarps and guarded by men who moved with practiced efficiency. Laura's team identified patterns suggesting the ship was preparing for more than a routine cargo run, with unmarked crates and late-night deliveries raising red flags. Caleb, barred from the operation but kept informed by Sarah, paced his apartment, his mind replaying the image of the woman at the docks. The family, gathered at Michael's insistence, prepared for the possibility of answers, their emotions a tangled mix of hope, fear, and lingering resentment. The docks, once a backdrop to Port Haven's daily life, now loomed as the key to unlocking the mystery of Emily's fate, a place where Caleb's persistence might finally bridge the decade-long gap between past and present. In the pre-dawn hours of a cold November morning in 2020, the Port Haven docks lay shrouded in a thin mist, the distant cry of gulls blending with the low hum of idling engines. The Harper family gathered at the Port Haven police station, a squat brick building a mile from the waterfront, their nerves frayed by anticipation and the weight of a decade without answers. Caleb, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, sat on a hard plastic chair in the station's waiting area, his hands clasped tightly to still their trembling. Michael, frail and leaning heavily on his cane, stared blankly at the tiled floor, his face etched with guilt and hope. Lily, her practical bob slightly disheveled, fidgeted with a coffee cup, her skepticism warring with a reluctant spark of belief. Noah, who had driven from Bangor the previous night, sat apart, his lanky frame hunched, his expression a mix of confusion and cautious optimism. The family had been summoned by Detective Laura Evans, who had orchestrated a sting operation targeting the Northern Star, the cargo ship tied to Robert Callahan's illicit network. The Harpers waited, tethered to the promise that this day might finally reveal the truth about Emily's disappearance. As the first light of dawn broke over the Atlantic, undercover officers moved silently through the docks, their dark clothing blending with the shadows of cranes and stacked containers. Laura Evans, a seasoned detective with a sharp mind and a calm demeanor, had spent the previous night finalizing the operation, coordinating with the Coast Guard and a tactical team from Portland. Intelligence gathered from Sarah Mitchell's research and Caleb's reckless dock visit had confirmed the Northern Star was preparing for an unscheduled departure, its crew loading crates under cover of darkness. The ship, a rusted behemoth moored at a secluded pier, was under heavy guard, its deck bustling with activity that suggested more than routine cargo handling. Laura's team, equipped with radios and body cameras, infiltrated the area, posing as dock workers to avoid suspicion. Their surveillance confirmed the presence of unmarked vans and hurried exchanges, reinforcing suspicions of smuggling or worse. At 5:37 a.m., Laura gave the signal, and the raid began with swift precision. Officers stormed the Northern Star, their boots thudding against the gangway as they boarded, flashlights cutting through the dim light. The crew, caught off guard, scattered, but the tactical team moved efficiently, detaining several men in heavy coats who attempted to flee into the maze of containers. The ship's hold, a cavernous space filled with crates and tarps, revealed a hidden compartment where a group of individuals, mostly women, worked under dim fluorescent lights, sorting packages with mechanical efficiency. Among them was a woman whose gaunt frame and gray-streaked hair stood out, her movements deliberate despite evident exhaustion. Her face, though aged by hardship, bore the unmistakable features of Emily Harper: high cheekbones, a slight tilt to her jaw, eyes that once sparkled with warmth now dulled by years of strain. The officers secured her gently, her wrists unbound, but her expression one of wary resignation, as if she had long accepted her fate. At the police station, the Harpers watched the operation unfold via a live feed from an officer's body camera. The grainy footage projected onto a monitor in a cramped briefing room. Caleb's breath caught as the camera panned to Emily, his heart pounding with recognition. Michael, seated beside him, let out a choked sob, his hands trembling as he clutched his cane, the weight of his guilt crashing over him like a wave. He had failed to protect her, he thought, his mind replaying the months when Emily had shielded him from their financial ruin, her sacrifices hidden behind her reassuring smiles. Lily, her eyes wide, struggled to reconcile the woman on the screen with the mother she had buried in her heart, her belief in Emily's abandonment crumbling under the reality of her survival. Noah, who had only fragments of memory to guide him, stared at the screen, his fingers digging into his palms, a flood of emotions stirring for a mother he barely knew. The family sat in stunned silence, their emotions a tangled mix of relief, anger, and sorrow. As the raid concluded, the police secured the Northern Star, escorting the detained crew and rescued individuals to a holding area on the docks. Emily, identified through fingerprints and a faded ID found in her possession, was separated for questioning, her identity confirmed by Laura Evans, who had studied the Harper case files overnight. Interrogations of the crew revealed a grim picture. Emily had been coerced into Callahan's organization after borrowing money to cover Michael's medical bills in 2010. Unable to repay the predatory loan, she had been forced to assume a new identity, her life controlled by threats against her family. She worked in Callahan's smuggling operations, handling untraceable goods, likely drugs or stolen items. Her silence ensured by the fear that any contact with her loved ones would bring harm to them. The other women on the ship, some from nearby towns, told similar stories of debt and coercion, their lives upended by Callahan's ruthless tactics. Laura Evans oversaw the processing of the rescued individuals, ensuring Emily received medical attention for malnutrition and exhaustion. The Northern Star was impounded, its cargo cataloged for evidence, but Robert Callahan himself remained elusive, his whereabouts unknown. Sarah Mitchell, present at the station to support Caleb, reviewed the raid footage, noting the efficiency of Callahan's operation and the likelihood that he had been tipped off about the sting, possibly by a mole within the Port Authority. The police detained several low-level operatives, including the security guard who had confronted Caleb, but their statements were guarded, offering little insight into Callahan's broader network. The operation had dismantled a piece of his empire, but its head remained at large, a shadow hanging over the victory. The Harpers, still reeling, were allowed a brief moment to process the news in the briefing room. Caleb stood by the monitor, his eyes fixed on a still image of Emily, her face a haunting blend of the mother he remembered and a stranger shaped by years of captivity. Michael, his shoulders slumped, wept silently, his guilt now compounded by the knowledge of Emily's sacrifice. Lily, torn between relief and resentment, clutched her coffee cup, her mind racing with questions about why Emily had never tried to reach them. Noah, overwhelmed, sat quietly, his gaze shifting between his family and the screen, grappling with the reality of a mother he would now have to know anew. The family's reunion with Emily was imminent, but the weight of her ordeal and their own fractured decade loomed large, a reminder that closure was only the beginning of a longer journey. In the late autumn of 2020, Emily Harper returned to Port Haven, Maine, her homecoming a fragile bridge between a decade of absence and a family reshaped by her loss. The Harper house on Maple Street, with its weathered clapboard and pine-shaded yard, welcomed her back, but the warmth of its walls could not erase the scars left by years of separation. Emily, now 48, was a shadow of the vibrant mother who had vanished in 2010, her auburn hair streaked with gray, her frame gaunt from malnutrition, and the relentless grind of her coerced labor in Robert Callahan's smuggling network. Her eyes, once bright with laughter, carried a guarded weariness, reflecting the toll of surviving under constant threat. The family, gathered to receive her, stood in the living room, their emotions a tangled knot of relief, uncertainty, and unspoken pain. Caleb, Michael, Lily, and Noah faced her as strangers bound by blood, each grappling with the challenge of reconciling the woman before them with the mother they had lost. Emily's first days at home were marked by tentative steps toward reconnection. She moved slowly through the house, her fingers tracing familiar surfaces, the worn kitchen table, the faded curtains, the photo albums stacked on a shelf. The family had preserved her presence in small ways, keeping her favorite teacup and scarf, but the home had changed in her absence, its spaces filled with the artifacts of their survival. Emily explained, in halting moments over tea, how Callahan's men had exploited her desperation in 2010, offering a loan to cover Michael's medical bills with terms that quickly ensnared her. When she couldn't repay, they forced her to assume a false identity, threatening her children's safety if she attempted contact. Her silence, she revealed, was her shield, a sacrifice to protect the family she loved. The explanation, though painful, began to unravel the family's long-held assumptions, but it also laid bare the depth of their shared wounds. Caleb, at 27, became Emily's anchor, his unwavering faith in her innocence now a lifeline for her reintegration. He spent hours at her side, driving her to therapy appointments in Portland, where a counselor helped her process the trauma of her captivity. His mechanic's hands, rough from years at the garage, were gentle as he carried her bags or steadied her arm, his presence a quiet reassurance that she was no longer alone. Caleb listened as Emily shared fragments of her ordeal. Endless days sorting contraband, sleepless nights under surveillance, the constant fear of retribution. His resolve to bring Callahan to justice grew stronger, and he continued working with Sarah Mitchell, the private investigator, to provide police with details from Emily's accounts. Sarah, meticulous in her follow-up, compiled evidence against Callahan's remaining operatives. Though the man himself remained a fugitive, his network weakened but not destroyed. Michael, now 50 and frail, wrestled with a guilt that threatened to consume him. The knowledge that Emily's suffering stemmed from his medical bills and his failure to question her financial decisions in 2010 weighed heavily on his conscience. He spent long evenings in the living room, seated across from Emily, his cane resting against his chair as he sought to rebuild their partnership. He acknowledged his role in their financial desperation, admitting he had been too absorbed in his pain to notice her sacrifices. Emily, though initially distant, began to respond to his efforts, their shared history a fragile thread they both clung to. They took slow walks in the backyard, the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot a reminder of simpler times, and Michael vowed to support her healing, even as he grappled with his own. Lily, at 24, found forgiveness elusive, her heart hardened by a decade of believing Emily had abandoned them. Her life at the coffee shop had been built on self-reliance, and the sudden return of her mother disrupted the narrative she had crafted to cope. She watched Emily from a distance, noting the way her hands trembled when pouring tea or the hesitation in her steps, signs of a woman reshaped by trauma. Lily's skepticism gave way to curiosity during family dinners, where Emily's stories of survival stirred a reluctant admiration. She began attending counseling with the family, arranged by Caleb, where a therapist guided them through exercises to rebuild trust. Lily's sketches, once abandoned, reappeared in a new notebook, her pencil capturing Emily's weary face in quiet moments, a tentative step toward understanding. Noah, 19 and a college freshman, approached his mother with a mix of curiosity and detachment. His memories of Emily were faint, reduced to snapshots of warmth and lavender scent, and her return felt like meeting a stranger who carried the weight of his childhood longing. He visited Port Haven on weekends, sitting with Emily in the living room, asking cautious questions about her life before and during her captivity. Her answers, though guarded, revealed a woman who had clung to thoughts of her children to survive, and Noah found himself drawn to her resilience. He shared stories of his computer science studies, his shy smile mirroring hers, and began to see her not just as a lost figure, but as a person with her own battles. The counseling sessions, though initially awkward, helped Noah articulate his sense of loss, forging a new connection with the mother he was only now beginning to know. The Harpers embraced family counseling as a collective effort, meeting weekly in a Portland office where the therapist encouraged them to voice their pain and hopes. The sessions were raw, filled with tears and silences, but they laid a foundation for healing. Emily learned to navigate the family's changed dynamics. Caleb's protective intensity, Michael's remorse, Lily's guarded warmth, Noah's cautious openness. The therapist introduced exercises like writing letters to one another, which Emily used to express her love and regret, her words bridging gaps that time had widened. The family began to share small rituals, like cooking together, Emily teaching Lily her old pot roast recipe, the kitchen filled with the scent of herbs and tentative laughter. As winter settled over Port Haven, the Harpers prepared for their first Thanksgiving with Emily in a decade. The dining room, long a place of absence, came alive with preparations. Caleb carved the turkey, his steady hands a contrast to the tremor in Michael's as he set the table. Lily arranged a centerpiece of pine cones and candles, her artistic touch softening the room's edges. Noah, home for the holiday, helped Emily mash potatoes, their shared task a quiet bond. The meal, simple but heartfelt, was a testament to their resilience, each bite a step toward reclaiming their shared history. The pine trees outside stood sentinel, their branches dusted with early snow, as the family faced the future together. The past, with its pain and unanswered questions, could not be undone, but the love that had endured through silence and distance held them fast, a fragile but unbroken thread weaving them into a new chapter.